Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode 234. The podcast is presented by Marshall Communications, which is creator of the 65-step Marshall Plan process. For those of you new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven, and I'm so excited because today we have two superstars in the PR world, Parry Headrick and Penn, and I want to welcome you both.
Great to be here with you, Nancy.
Thank you very much.
It's nice to have you. So founder of Crackle PR, Parry Headrick is a 20-plus year tech PR agency veteran, having grown some of the largest privately held agencies in North America. Parry has grown an audience of more than 60,000 across social media channels by discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly of the PR agency. And ironically, that's actually why we're here today, because I have been following Parry on Twitter, and we've been engaging there. And then that resulted in him coming on and asking Chris, because our topic is AI, and Chris is an expert in that. So he is an authority on analytics, digital marketing, marketing technology, data science, and machine learning. As co-founder and chief data scientist of Trust Insights, he is responsible for the creation of products and services, creation and maintenance of all code and intellectual property, technology and marketing strategy, brand awareness, research, and development. And I think one of the reasons probably Chris is so popular with PR people is many people go into PR if they're not good at any of those things. So you are very wanted and needed, Chris. So Parry, let's start with you. Tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Sure. So I'll keep this relatively brief, but I was a journalist, like a lot of folks who went to the dark side in PR. And the pivotal moment for me was I wrote a series of articles about a person in Lowell, Mass, a boy who had toxic chemicals in his backyard. And I wrote a series of straight news pieces about this. And Sunday's paper was above the fold about this article. And the headline was "Toxic Boy's Illness Still a Mystery," in quotation marks, as if I had said that or anyone had said that. And so I was just outraged that could be the case. I had earned the trust of that boy's family, and they really, really did me dirty on that. So that was my sort of eye-opening moment where I said, this is a little bit more about the sensationalism and the eyeballs than it is about the story. So I started looking around to figure out a way to parlay my writing and communication skills into something that was a little less sort of sensational and could also be maybe a little more lucrative. And so I hitched my wagon early to a company called Sterling Hager, which was the precursor for what became Shift Communications, and then worked my way through the ranks, moved to San Francisco, and then worked all the way through up to VP of marketing. And that's when around the time that Penn joined the agency, not long after I joined, and then left. So since then, I have worked at a couple of different larger PR agencies, including Matter Communications, which is 350 people or so, seven offices nationally, with a who's who of tech clients. And then during the pandemic, I started my own company, which is Crackle PR. And the whole idea was predicated on the idea of working with demonstrably good companies. So Doesn't mean you're necessarily, curing cancer or saving lives, although it could. But really what it means is that we're not working with people that are not doing right by the world. And usually the people we work with are making life more collaborative with less friction, reducing barriers to entry, and making the world a more sort of equitable, friendly place. And that's where we find ourselves today.
Thanks, Parry. Yeah, it's great to work with great clients that you feel proud of. I mean, it kind of makes it easy to go to work every day.
Well, I want my kids to look at what their dad is doing and saying, oh, wow, he's working with some really good companies doing good things, instead of, for example, working with tobacco companies or people who are polluting the environment or people who are, maybe spreading disinformation. So the idea is if you work with good people and good companies, that'll build a halo effect on your brand. And that's what the Crackle team is all about.
Love that. Thanks, Parry. So Chris, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Oh, gosh. I started in IT. I was an IT person, and in the early 2000s, I joined a startup. And as everyone knows, in startups, you are the CTO, the CFO, the CMO, and the guy who cleans the restroom on Fridays. What happened during the 2000s was interesting. Technology became marketing technology, a field we now know as marketing technology or MarTech. And so I went from update the web server to update the website, and eventually became involved in digital marketing. Around the time that was when podcasting started. So I launched the first podcast in the financial services space, the Financial Aid Podcast, and now have the second oldest marketing podcast on the planet, Marketing Over Coffee, which turned 16 this year.
Wow, that's awesome. Amazing. That's a long time.
It was, yeah. And then in the early 2010s, a friend of mine said, you really need to work at an agency because this, no one company is going to be able to use all that you can do, but lots of different clients can work, with different aspects. So I did that. I joined Shift Communications, as Parry mentioned. And it was about that time that I went from, my focus was analytics to starting to get into data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence around 2012, 2013. And that's when so much of the PR industry was still very numbers averse or using numbers that are made up, like add value equivalents, like measuring square inches of a newspaper. Like, that doesn't really work with the internet, holding a ruler to your
We did that.
Yep. And developing the statistical capabilities now so that today you can actually measure public relations impacts in a credible way. So in 2017, my partner and CEO, Katie, we were working together at the agency. We're like, the agency is going in one direction, and we see this area with AI being, this is the way to go. And so we parted ways and started Trust Insights. We opened the doors in 2018, and here we are 5 years later doing analytics, doing stuff with data. But now, as of last November, actually really it was 2022 was the big year. First you had DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, people making crazy AI generated images of like dogs on skateboards wearing tutus, right? And then in November, ChatGPT launched, and suddenly people are like, oh, AI can do stuff. Like, yeah, I've been saying AI can do stuff for 10 years now, but it's now accessible in a way that the totally non-technical can use. And so that's how we got to today. Is the rest of the world is catching up to where we've been for years.
One thing I'll just add to that, when it comes to the ChatGPT reference in November, it was the first time, people kind of got a sense for what AI can do because you could touch it. And the analogy that I heard from the founder of HubSpot was that it's a little bit like Netscape was back in the day, where people knew about the internet. They heard about all these, things it could do, but they didn't have a way to physically touch it yet. And so it didn't seem real. And Netscape was sort of the first entree into people understanding what the potential was, and it was blowing people's minds back then in a similar way to what ChatGPT and generative AI is doing today.
Well, it's been interesting, as someone who has been in public relations since I used an electric typewriter and thought it was pretty cool to have an erase key.
Yeah, wow.
It has been very interesting to watch the evolution. And along those lines, Parry, how do you feel that AI will impact the PR industry? And is AI going to replace all of us PR professionals?
The answer is that we're all going to be replaced. I kid. No, so it's a big question, and it's an unfolding question in the sense that I don't think we fully know the ramifications yet, although we have some early indicators and we can kind of forecast how it's going to go. So I guess I would answer it this way. I'm working with people like Penn right now to figure out how to best streamline all of the things that we do in PR, the basics like monitoring for news and reporting, and even things like content generation, social media, monitoring, all of these things. So we're working on that now, and there's a variety of tools that we can incorporate into the mix that exist today, and I'm sure that those will change quickly, and there'll be more that get added to the heap of things you can do over time. So that's one thing, is working on the tools that can streamline efficiencies and make our lives a little bit easier. Against that backdrop, I think there will be some casualties ultimately, and I think it will be at the lowest levels of PR, in the sense that many of the tasks that like an account coordinator can do today can be automated and use AI to achieve in minutes versus the hours that they would typically do for exhaustive research, for example, and just combing the internet manually. So I think there will be some casualties. I think it'll be the lowest level folks initially. But I think that also creates opportunities for those lower level folks to start thinking more strategically early about storytelling and kind of punch above their weight class to get into those conversations that their superiors are already having. Because if not, they're going to kind of be by the wayside. Now, what does that mean at a macro level for the industry? So I think the biggest challenge is going to be for the largest agencies. And I'll tell you why. A lot of them are based on time and materials models, right? So it's like there's a certain amount of hours that they, bill clients for. And, at some point, if you run out of those hours, you have to pay more money and that kind of thing. Well, a lot of those hours are predicated on the work that interns and account coordinators and account executives are spending doing a whole hell of a lot of research and a lot of manual intensive stuff. And so you tell me how, the giant conglomerates who bill hourly are going to justify that ungodly expense that these human beings who are fallible, just like humans are doing when AI can replace what they're doing in seconds or minutes instead of days or hours. Explain that to me. Explain that math, how they're going to justify that big spend. So I think ultimately the biggest disruption is going to be how the largest agencies are billing and justifying the fees they get. And I think at the smaller level, it's going to be a little easier to be more nimble because, you haven't pinned your hopes and dreams on a model that is antiquated in the age of AI.
Right. That's a great answer. And I think there will forever be a need for a human brain to be managing, monitoring, deciding what tech to use, and there's got to be advancements in tech. And Chris, you can talk more about that. So
well, I want to go with
Yeah,
what Parry was saying, because I think there's two important sub considerations. One, agencies are going to have a real leadership problem in 10 years, right? When you get rid of 90% of your junior people, there's not enough people to march up the ladder into management and into leadership, right? You will have okay, well, who's going to run this place now that I want to retire? We got rid of everyone. Oh, well, that's a problem. So progressive agencies that are forward thinking will be looking at, okay, how do we reskill people? Like, okay, you're no longer writing press releases. Now you're writing large language model prompts. You're no longer, scanning the news. You are now tuning the model to judge whether the output's really good or not. These are learnable skills. The ability for someone to be curious, to be persistent, to be driven, to be focused, that doesn't change. But the other side is that the quality of work for agencies who adopt AI will go up, because let's face it, people exist pretty much on a bell curve, right? You have a couple of superstars on your team. You have a couple of, we probably shouldn't have hired them. And you have a whole bunch of, they get the job done, right? AI each year advances from 5 years ago, right? It was right? It could string sentences together, maybe on a good day, but it was mostly incoherent. To 3 years ago being, okay, that's mediocre, I can crank up press releases, right? Because press releases are so templated that, the machines are able to learn them. To today, with the current generation of language models, are really good. They're capable of generating not only coherent text, but having it be high quality. And so if you have an account coordinator who comes out of school and they're a mediocre writer, they don't pass muster, right? I saw a great piece of commentary the other day. It said, if ChatGPT and the GPT family of language models can generate better quality than you can, why would I ever hire you?
Right. Well, what about will newspapers, if they're still in existence, will the media consist of AI also? So will it be AI on the PR side speaking to AI on
it
the
already
journalism
does.
side?
It already does. If you look at like CNET and other publications, they are starting to crank out a tremendous amount of AI generated content because they've downstaffed so much, particularly during the pandemic. And now they're seeing content generation tools that can generate the same mediocre content they've always published. It's just, with slightly less strong opinions, that they're cranking out content that fits what the mission is. And for these companies, the mission is attracting traffic to sell ads. They don't really care how they do it. They just have to attract traffic. This is for the larger media companies, I should say. They're for like boutique media companies, individual influencers, personal blogs, YouTube channels of known people. Those are still going to be very personality and human driven because they have to be, right? Casey Neistat's not going to replace himself with a reader, just a reader reading GPT generated scripts. But for the big old school traditional content companies, AI is a huge cost saver, and pitching a journalist becomes impossible when there aren't any.
Yeah. I love the fact that you brought up personal brand, because I do like to talk about personal branding. And, a personal brand is a human brand, right? So it shows the importance of establishing your personal brand and differentiating yourself from everyone else who does what you do. So thanks for bringing that up, Chris. And Parry, how are you and your agency adapting to these shifts and growing your ranks from beneath?
So I think two things here. One is we're hitching our wagon to people who are smarter about this universe, like Chris Penn, than we are, to help navigate through that and figure out, what the proper path is. And I think that there are precious few outfits like Trust Insights that are able to help agencies like mine shepherd in this new kind of era that we find ourselves in. But you mentioned personal brand, and I think there's a really important sort of corollary there, and that is that companies' brands themselves are in a really sort of difficult spot now. And Chris was the first person that kind of opened my eyes to this idea, which is that we're almost entering this post search world, post search engine world. In the sense that, like right now on my phone, I have a few different apps. And if I have questions, I'm no longer going to Google for everything or Bing or whatever your search engine is. I'm actually just using these apps like Poe and others to quickly just get the information I'm looking for today, instead of scrolling through, dozens and dozens of paid ads and sponsored ads and gobbledygook that it's all written for SEO. And the classic example I always use is, if I want a recipe for chicken piccata, I used to go to Google, put in chicken piccata, and then I would sift through, the life story of this author's chicken piccata background. And his mom used to make chicken piccata. And where did chicken piccata come from? And you can substitute chicken piccata for this and that. And it's all written for SEO value. It's 100% so that you'll rise to the top of the rankings. And so that's going to be a problem when people can get the information very quickly without all the BS right on an app, right on their phone. So what happens then to brands who are relying on SEO and backlinks and branded search and all of that, right? Like their personal brand is pinned to this model of SEO that is going to become, if not obsolete, then certainly compromised. And so what do you do then from a PR standpoint to have your brand with that same halo effect that it had in the day when people could punch your name up and find you on Google? And the answer is by connecting to communities and individuals that have strong personal brands that can help sort of carry you in to the future. And Chris is much smarter about this than I am, but like that's going to be a thing. And so I'm not only thinking internally about how we're going to change, but also how we're going to help our clients change into this new world now that PR and everything else is fundamentally turned on its head.
I am just loving all of this so much on so many levels. But one thing is, do you really like to make chicken piccata?
I am the cook in my family, and I made it as recently as last week.
Well, we put out a monthly e-newsletter where we feature a recipe, and I would love to get your recipe so we can include that, because it's actually, we include recipes from our staff and clients because everybody cooks, everybody eats, and anyway, that's part of our agency brand. We're going to continue with more from Parry and Chris, but now it's time to remind you that you can get a free PR Maven Things to Do pad. And this is for those of you who make like an old-fashioned handwritten pad. You guys might end up getting one in the mail if you actually have it. Chris, I don't know, when you do your grocery list, do you write it out, or do you do it on your no.
All electronic?
Yeah. Anyway, go to prmaven.com/giveaway and we'll send you a pad in the mail. And we're going to hear from our friends at Sprague and Curtis Real Estate and be right back.
Sprague & Curtis is a locally owned real estate company. We're primarily focused in Central Maine. I got excited about Nancy's book because she's so well known in the area for her marketing and branding techniques, and we're always looking to expand and learn and grow. And so a lot of us here at the office decided that we wanted to read her book and learn some new techniques.
It benefits Sprague & Curtis to have a large brand and audience because there can often be multiple years between transactions with clients. So it's important to network with them and stay in touch with them in those in-between periods. And this book really helped us learn some techniques and methods to continue to do that. We organized a small book group with Nancy's book with brokers in our office this winter to share information and remind ourselves how important it is to always be working on our network and continually reaching out to our customers.
Platforms like social media are important in expanding your business, but equally as important are handwritten notes, cards, letters. She inspired me to send her a note of appreciation, just thanking her for the book and her insight. In reading Nancy's book, I was excited to look to continue to grow our brand and our audience. I think she does a great job of motivating us.
Nancy's book really helped me learn a few things in marketing and branding and how important it is to stay on top of reaching out to clients periodically, staying top of mind, providing useful information, and really telling our story as a company.
Welcome back to the PR Maven Podcast. We're talking today with Parry Headrick and Chris Penn, and the podcast is available on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So hopefully you're tuning in on one or more of those platforms. So Chris, how did data analytics and PR go hand in hand?
Well, they haven't necessarily, but they should. And the reason they should is because public relations has traditionally been kind of the redheaded stepchild in the C-suite, because proving the value of what PR is and how it works has traditionally been very, very difficult for the average PR practitioner or the average PR firm to do. And the reason for this is that much of the activity happens outside of a company's data, right? When Parry and I did an interview recently for PR News, and there was a great mention of both of our companies in this placement. It was read by other people. It has made an impression on someone's brain. However, there's no clickable links in it, and there's no traffic to our website. So if you were to go with basic data, you would say, well, that didn't do anything. Well, did it? How would you know? And this is where data science and machine learning actually come in handy. There are techniques within data science where you can say, okay, over a period of time, here are the things that happen. Like there's a placement here, there's a placement here, there's a great podcast that we were guesting on. And then here are the other metrics and the other forms of data, and here's the conversions or the outcomes we care about. And there's a technique in statistics, it's called survival modeling or uplift modeling, where you could say, if I take away everything else, business as usual, the ads you were running anyway, the emails you were sending anyway, we take all that out of the data. What's left is the result of those activities, right? Of the PR program. And that is what you can then say, this is the value that it delivers, because we can see there is a percentage of the traffic, of the engagement, of the conversions that turns into real money at the end of the day. That modeling is statistically, it's relatively straightforward. It's a form of regression analysis, but this is stuff that they don't teach people in public relations programs. It's not something that public relations practitioners in even the largest agencies and the most well-funded agencies ever learn how to do, because it's not within the universe of how people think about public relations. And this is about to get much, much worse for people with things like artificial intelligence and language models. Let me show you a real quick example here. If we can bring up the screen share that I just put on. So we just saw that promo from Sprague & Curtis, right? They're based in Augusta, Maine. They're a real estate agency. I asked Google Bard, which is Google's entry into the large language models, which realtor in Augusta, Maine is the best for sellers, right? For home sellers. And here's what is returned. You'll notice there's not a thing to click on here, right? This is all brand and nothing but brand. And if the language model knows about you, it will tell the user, hey, here's some things you should go check out. These are brands. I don't know any of these people. We were obviously not paid to talk about them. But there's nothing to click on. There's no inbound links. There's no outbound links. There's not traditional SEO. This is a language model giving an answer to a real person about here's how to think about this particular topic. This is what PR people have to now contend with, right? This is and being able to measure the impact of brand building activities is going to be critical if you want to be able to prove the value of what you do.
That's a fascinating example. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for bringing it home. So how can PR people leverage machine learning to make their jobs easier, but still produce quality work with integrity?
Well, there's three branches of machine learning that people care about. It's called regression, classification, and generation, aka find it, organize it, and make it, right? So find it is regression analysis, like we just talked about. How do you measure the value of PR? That's going to be one of the things that people in public relations absolutely positively have to get their arms around sooner rather than later, right? And there are tools and techniques that can do a lot of this analysis. A lot of it's custom, because for every client, it's different. Every client's industry is different. Every client's position in that industry is different. So it's not something we can just buy a piece of software and go with it. You actually have to have some expertise in-house or with a partner agency. Second category is classification, organize it. We know there's no shortage of information online, right? We know there's no shortage of social media mentions and news placements and YouTube channels. The tough part is organizing all that information. And this is, again, where some of the tools like ChatGPT can now surf the web, right? So you can tell ChatGPT, here's a list of articles from our coverage tracking system. Give me a one-line summary of each one, or tell me if our client appears in this article in a positive way, right? And it can give you a very quick summary of the day's news. That's organization of data. And then the third aspect is the generation. And this is, again, where tools like GoCharlie and Jasper and ChatGPT and all these, the 200 new AI companies that sprung up last week, that's where the PR folks will have the easiest on-ramp, is using these tools to say, let's go ahead and try automating press releases. Let's try automating outreach letters. Let's try automating the first draft of a place contributed content and things. And that's where, if they get good at a technique called prompt engineering, aka programming a computer in straight language, they will succeed. There's a great quote by Andre Karpathy on Twitter in January. It says, the hottest programming language in 2023 is English, right? Being able to just write what you want the computer to do, and it will do it. You are going to see a huge change later this year when the large language model interface, the ChatGPT style interface, ships with Microsoft Office. Every person in your company who uses Microsoft Office will now have access to a language model and will be able to do things like make a 10-slide presentation out of this press release, right? Can you imagine having a PR person be able to do that and put together something, a presentation for the board? Or tell me what's important in this Excel spreadsheet, right? Tell me what the outcome was, and the models will do that instead. So it will dramatically shorten the amount of time it takes people to do work. And everyone is going to have to get good at this, because it's going to be built into Office. It's already built into your search engines, and it's going to be appearing in pretty much every piece of software that is complex to use.
Well,
to add just quickly to that, Nancy, just
Go
quickly,
ahead.
I just want to say what a great summary Chris just laid out. And if that doesn't, kind of give you smelling salts as a PR person, then I don't know what will. But here's what I will say. I know right now that there's a whole lot of people in the PR universe, and I talk to them, and they're sort of whistling past the graveyard, hoping that this whole thing blows over like the metaverse or whatever. It's like a flash in the pan kind of thing. They are doomed unless they get on board right now. You may not agree with the direction the world's heading. You may not like it, but it is what it is. And so we have to not only live with this technology, but use it to our advantage or become roadkill. It's really that simple.
It is. Bloomberg 2 weeks ago, announced they have their own proprietary language model inside the venerable 41-year-old Bloomberg terminal. It doesn't do poems or limericks or stuff like that. What it does is it allows a financial analyst to type in plain language, show me 10 stocks that have had 5% gains in the last 5 years that have a dividend over $9 per share. You hit go, and it does the analysis and spits the results back to you. They tuned it on 41 years of their own data to give themselves a strategic advantage. Now, something that the best PR agency should be thinking about. What data do you have that's been laying around? Maybe you've got it on servers or in your email system. What data do you have that if you had the money and the expertise, you could train your own language models on to speed up the process of using these things within your office? If you have a coverage report that you hand to your clients that is the same thing every week, right? Is the exact same template. How do you train a model to do that for you so that the client still gets the high quality output they are expecting, but you're spending 5 minutes instead of 5 hours or 5 days putting that thing together?
Circling back to that point about charging clients by the hour, how are you going to justify that when you're able to do it instantly? Lickety split.
We have that conversation. So one of the things I remember having a conversation with a potential client. I said, the project is $5,000. And they said, oh, well, what is it on an hourly basis? $5,000.
Exactly. Yeah. It's more of the value-based model than the hourly based. So I love that. I had a clipping service that I started back in the 90s, and I think I employed 16 part-time people and subscribed to all of the newspapers in the state of Maine. And they would come in and grab their newspapers, take them home, look through them, cut out the articles for our clients, paste them on to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, then fax them out to the clients every day, and then measure for ad equivalency value. And that's how we did reporting in the 1990s. But I will say that a very influential person in my career was Chip Carey, who was the vice president of marketing at Sugarloaf Ski Resort and then Jackson Hole. And he said to me, you've got to stay on top of technology because it is going to be advancing. So I did learn how to do DBase 3+ coding to create a database from my Rolodex. and I just feel like, yes, things are advancing, but they have been advancing for many years. And I think PR people have to just stay on top of these trends. And you don't necessarily have to know how to use them. You don't have to know how to do it. You just have to know how to access it. Right, Chris? Wouldn't you say a PR person just needs to be aware?
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. Do you need to know how a blender works? I mean, it's helpful, particularly if it breaks and there's no repair service. But to just operate, you need to know what it does, what goes into it, and what the expected outcomes are, right? And what's the proper use of it. If you're making steak, the blender is probably not the best choice for an appliance in your kitchen. You don't need to know how a microwave works, but you do need to know the gotchas, right? A microwave is nothing more than boiling something in its own water, and whatever water content is in the material is waterless boiling. So if you're cooking a food that you shouldn't be boiling, a microwave is not the right way to cook that food. The same is true with AI tools, right? You don't have to know what kind of language model, whether it's transformers or diffusers, but you'd better know what this thing is good at, what this thing is not good at, when to use it, when not to use it, and be capable of using it in a safe way, right? You don't put a metal container in the microwave unless you want to have a conversation with firemen that day. You don't use a large language model for certain types of tasks. The challenge for people now is to figure out what are those tasks, because the frontiers and the boundaries keep changing. The current generation of language models, this will give you some context. 3 years ago, OpenAI rolled out a model called GPT-2. It had a memory range of about 1,024 tokens. A token is a portion of a word, so it could understand about a paragraph, right? You give it a paragraph, and it could write a paragraph. GPT-3 came out the year after. That had a token range of 2,048 tokens. It could now understand a couple of paragraphs. People who were playing around were like, oh, okay, this can start to write press releases, right? Because they're not super long. GPT 3.5, which came out last year, which was what ChatGPT uses natively, now holds 4,000 tokens, right? So about 3,000 words. And people are noticing, hey, this thing writes good blog posts. The current generation, GPT-4, behind the scenes, can handle 32,000 tokens. So you can load a novella into this and get a novella out. The coming models next year will handle 64,000 tokens. You'll be able to take an entire business book, put it in this thing, and say, hey, rewrite this in emoji, right? Or rewrite this in Aramaic or something like that. And it will be able to capably do that without losing its way. So the ability for models to do these crazy tasks now, we're still trying to learn what they are. I'll give you another example. I took some lyrics from a country music song, and I told GPT-4, just on the lyrics alone, infer what the music should be. And it gave me musical notation. They handed it to a guitar player. They played it and like, okay, that's actually it's not what the original song was, but that works just as well. These models are going to change every task that deals with text, deals with language. So for PR folks, that's pretty much like 100% of the job is text, right? If it's text, the models can work with it. It's just a question of how skilled you are at using it. Again, you don't put put the crazy like pieces of metal in your blender, not intentionally. So you shouldn't do certain things with these models, but you'd better learn what they can do.
And to kick it old school, every PR agency that is going to try to navigate this world is going to need like a Chris Penn or people who are taught by Chris Penn to become Sherpas within the agency, essentially, to help guide safely, correctly, in the right way, at the right time, using the right tools. And without that, it's going to be an exercise in folly a little bit and a lot of big kind of ugly misses. And so I think that's the thing that a lot of agencies really ought to be looking for now is someone who is adept at not only understanding this complex world, but at helping companies deploy them in a way that is most efficient for them, safe for them, and more importantly, beneficial to the client.
And the three things agencies need to do in addition to the AI stuff that are insurance policies to protect themselves. One, we talked about this already. You had better have a brand people can remember, right? They, off the top of their heads, they'd be able to just yell at their smartwatch, hey, show me cracklepr.com, right? They should be able to just, boom, do that right away. Two, an agency must become a publisher. You have got to have your own media channel that you can distribute stuff on that people will consume because they want to. One of the first things we did when we set up Trust Insights, day one, we started a newsletter, right? And 5 years later, we have 25,000 subscribers on this thing on a weekly newsletter. Three, you need a community. We have a Slack group we run, about 3,000 people, called Analytics for Marketers. There is no AI involved at all. It is just a big chat room, right? If I was starting over today, I would start with a platform like Discord instead because it's better for these sorts of things. But you need a community where you can reliably get in touch with your friendlies, with your coworkers, maybe with others in the industry, in a place that is not mediated by somebody else's AI, because that is the only way you're going to be able to get the word out. And here's the thing, with AI algorithms, particularly for social media, it doesn't take much to bend the algorithm to your will. It's about 2,000 people is what you need on your side. So if you can get 2,000 people to do what you want for big pushes, big promotions, you can dramatically increase your reach way beyond what even paying money will do. I've been working on this volunteer campaign for the last few months, measuring every part of it. And it's about 2,000 people can get you to the top of Twitter's trending list, can get you in Time Magazine, all these things just by knowing how to manipulate the algorithms with the right number of people. But you need that people in your community to do it.
You got all that, Nancy? You got it all?
Well, I mean, I talk a lot about having a community of raving fans or brand ambassadors, and that's what you're talking about. So it all makes so much sense, and it's spot on. And I want to hear more about trust insights and why that's so important, Chris.
So our company is a management and marketing consulting firm. We go into companies, big and small, and A, repair things, and B, guide them as to what they need to be working on next, looking at ways to deploy AI that are sensible, starting small pilot programs, right? So real simple things like if you were to go into a PR agency, like, okay, first, let's take care of your coverage tracking. Your coverage tracking is consuming 80 hours of the week, right? It's consuming 2.5 heads of FTE, and it's something that should be 100% automated at this point. There's no reason why your coverage tracking and your coverage reporting should not be fully automated. When we built our own coverage tracking system a few years ago, it scrapes the sources we care about. It brings in data from social media systems. It scores it, it rates it, and then we use the data in our newsletter and things like that. The amount of time it takes us to schedule social media posts and do coverage tracking is about 5 minutes a week, because the system's doing it. We have about 20 clients. We're a 3-person company, right? Name another PR agency. We're not a PR agency, by the way, but name another agency that has that many clients with so few employees, one of whom's just the salesperson, right? He doesn't do a lot of client-facing work. Who's doing all the work? Mostly the machines, right? The machines are mostly doing the work.
But you know what to tell the machines what to do.
Exactly. And write the code for it. Our monthly reporting, we do reporting for about a dozen clients, attribution analysis, deep dives, search engine analysis, and stuff. All that's machines. That is, we write the conclusions and tell the clients what to do. Like, here's what this data tells you to do. So here's your top 3 things. Do these 3 things this month. That's the human contribution looking at the data. But the machines are processing all this stuff. Now, if you did this by hand, you would spend all month doing reporting. Like, you would never stop. You'd be, typing things into a spreadsheet. If you're typing something here's the rule. If you do something more than 3 times, a machine should be doing it, right? If it's a repetitive task, you do more than 3 times, a machine should be doing it.
That's great advice. Now, Chris, how about your podcast? You mentioned that you've had it for 18 years.
16 years, marketingovercoffee.com. So my friend and co-host John Wall and I started in a Dunkin' Donuts in Natick, right off of Route 9. We started there very early in the morning because we were both going to different jobs at the time. And it was basically like Statler and Waldorf, 2 grumpy old men just yelling about the state of marketing. And it is still that, except it's now online because we live in different parts of the state. But no, we've been around. We're a weekly show. We do tons and tons of interviews, typically of folks who have something interesting to say. And there's actually kind of an interesting screening process now because we get about 40 or 50 pitches a week. The first thing I ask is, hey, in your company, do you have because I've got a separate YouTube series I'm working on right now, trying to focus on women in data science and AI, because they're underrepresented in the field, particularly women of color. And so my first question to people is, hey, do you have somebody in your company who's identifies as a woman who would be interested in talking? And if the answer is no, we don't have any women here. And like, okay, well, I guess we're not talking to you.
Thank you for honoring women in the industry. So yeah, last week on our podcast, we featured 8 students who are in the master's program at Northeastern University in marketing data analytics. And they have been actually working on a research project for this podcast as a experiential learning project. So I'm going to make sure that they all listen to this episode because I think they could learn a lot from both of you. So I want to thank you both for coming today. And I want to know, how can people follow up with you, Parry, or you, Chris?
Sure. So for me, I'm really most active on 2 platforms. LinkedIn, it's just put my name in. It's just like it sounds, Parry. And then on Twitter, I'm P Headrick, just my first initial in Headrick. Those are the places that I hang most often, and I'd be delighted to connect with folks who are looking to learn about PR.
And the easiest place to find me is trustinsights.ai, because who the heck's going to know what's going on with, the new management at Twitter, for example, removing the W from the buildings, setting everything on fire. Who knows? So just go to the website, and that's where we're hiding from the end of the world.
That's smart, Chris. I might start saying that same thing. Seriously. Yeesh.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you and learn from you all day long. I really value your time. Thank you for joining me and everyone in PR Maven Nation, which is my nation of raving fans and brand ambassadors. And I just feel like there's still a place for a human person and a human personality in all of this. So I feel like the important thing, as you both pointed out, is to be curious and to be always learning and never stop. So have a great day, both of you and everyone in PR Maven Nation. Thank you for joining us today.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.